going to talk about something today that is not necessarily commonly talked about in churches or spiritual centers or places like that. And as I begin that, I want to say that it really is an honor to be able to stand here and speak. It's an honor to be able to stand before you and speak. It's an honor to stand where Reverend Wendy stands, where Peter Boland stands, where Reverend Will stood so many, many times and offered their view of things. Reverend Wendy will be back next week again, speaking to the book Daring Greatly. Anyone here for the first time, please know she is awesome. I'm going to talk today about doubt. I'm going to talk today about the importance of doubt. I'm going to talk about doubt as a spiritual practice. And I'm going to talk about why in this time and in this place and in this moment, doubt is such an important thing, in my opinion, that we allow ourselves to be able to have. There's a quote from H.L. Mencken that I want to start with. Moral certainty is never a sign of cultural superiority. The more uncivilized someone is, the surer they are that they know precisely what is right and what is wrong. All human progress, even in morals, has been the work of people who have doubted the current moral values, not of people who whooped them and always tried to enforce them to their will. The truly civilized person is always skeptical and tolerant. In this field, as all others, their culture is based on the phrase, "I am not too sure." And I love that last line, because it's not saying that we can't have confidence. It's not saying that we can't have room in our lives for passion and belief, but allows us to have the concept that we're not too sure. And there's a slight humorous bit in this, in that I really don't like H.L. Mencken. And I found myself deciding whether or not I wanted to use that quote based on that, and I realized that was the whole point of the quote. As is so often the case, we end up living our talks during the week, and when you give a talk on doubt, hoo boy, what a fun trip that is. In fact, I had a dream 2 nights ago after a week of worry. I was very excited. I have a piece about doubting Thomas that I've been excited to share for weeks and months. I've been planning this, and this week I suddenly was consumed with doubt. I had a dream where I was giving this talk, and everybody left except for Phyllis Gottschall. So Phyllis, thank you in my dream for staying. And it's interesting, it was exactly the same spot. And what I love about, and I do see, thank you. I knew someone was going to do that. I'm glad it was you, Amy. What's nice about my dreams now is I'm always cutting myself slack, even in my nightmares. In the dream, there was some other reason people were leaving. It wasn't necessarily me. I take that as a sign of growth, that even in my nightmare, my psyche isn't completely trying to shatter me. But as we talk about doubt, this was inspired in part by a discussion I had with a young man. He'd been a soldier in the wars in the Middle East. He'd come home. He's in a straight-ahead, standard kind of Christian seminary school. He was talking to me, and he was in a place with some doubt. He was in that place I think people often get towards the end of their seminary experience of wanting more. What else is out there? And he told me about a book called The Sin of Certainty, Why God Desires Our Trust More Than Our Correct Beliefs. And I know that here in Unity, we really don't use the word sin very often. And for those of you that don't know this, the core of the word sin, the origin, is an archery term. It means missing the mark. It means you didn't hit your target. You might want to take another shot. You might want to practice. So we look at it differently. But there's a couple of quotes, and this one really struck me. Church is too often the riskiest place to be spiritually honest. And isn't that a shame? And I had a vision in my mind that it is so much easier, and I don't go to a lot of bars, so I'm kind of imagining this, but it would be so much easier to be in a bar at 1:30, turn to someone and say, sometimes I'm not sure I believe in God, and have a really good discussion about that. And yet, when we come to a place where we specialize in God and spirituality, where you'd think we can talk about everything about God, we tend not to be able to. Now, we're very fortunate. Unity really is a spirituality of questioning, a spirituality of personal belief, a spirituality of not believing things just because we're told to. I have no idea what that sound is. Apparently neither does the sound man. Unity is that type of religion. But how many of us even here in a class or in the cafe would feel comfortable saying, sometimes I just really doubt I'm not sure I believe in God. Sometimes I don't believe the things that we teach here. Sometimes I'm still questioning. I have my doubts. How many of you would feel really super comfortable saying that? I'm glad. See, this says a lot about us. Because I think it's really important that we allow for doubts. One of the most exciting things about teaching the prayer class is when people feel safe enough in that group, in that class, to say, not only they may not believe in prayer, they may not believe in God. And yet they're there in the prayer class because they're seeking the belief. They're seeking to know. They don't want to believe just because Phil said so, or Wendy said so, or a book said so. They want it because they want to believe it. They're in a place of doubt. And I think that is one of the healthiest places that we can be in. Now, I want to make something very clear, that there are different kinds of doubt, and I want to thank David Stanley for giving me the phrase skillful doubt. I'm calling it also conscious doubt. There's two kinds of this. Hindering doubt, that's that doubt that curls us up, that's that doubt that makes us hide. That's the doubt, by the way, that usually makes us suddenly have to believe in things without questioning, because we're scared. And then there's conscious doubt. There's the doubt that moves us to seek, that pushes us to say, maybe I'm wrong. What would it mean if I was wrong? What would that look like? Maybe I'm not right. Maybe I am not absolutely 100% certainly correct, even though I am a parent. And this is from an article from 2004 by Gil Frosdal. Hindering doubt is not the same as questioning doubt. Questioning doubt is his term for skillful doubt. Doubt as a hindrance leads to inaction and giving up. Questioning doubt inspires action and the impulse to understand. It can, in fact, be helpful for mindfulness practice. It encourages us to overcome complacency and long-held ideas that may no longer serve. There's another quote I have from one of my favorite authors, Joseph Campbell. The first law of science is that truth has not been found. The laws of science are working hypothesis. The scientist knows that at any moment, facts may be found that make the present theory obsolete. It is happening now and constantly. It's amusing that in religious tradition, the older the doctrine, the truer it is held to be. In the scientific tradition, on the other hand, a paper written 10 years ago may already be out of date. There's a continuous movement onward. There's no law, no rock of ages on which you can rest. There's nothing of the kind. It's fluid. And as we know, rocks are fluid too. It just takes them a long time to flow. And that's what unity is based on, by the way. Unity is open at the top. Unity is based on the idea that as generations grow with this philosophy, with these ideas, with this absolutely beautiful way of thinking, new thoughts will come up. New ideas may leave old ideas behind. That's why unity is part of a movement called New Thought. It's not because it was new when it came out. Anyone who studied unity knows the ideas have been around for a long, long time. It's because unity and the other parts of this wonderful constellation of philosophies are about having a new thought, allowing a new thought. And often it is that shadow of a doubt that allows the space for that thought to develop, isn't it? Often it is that place in us. This thing is just not working for me today. This next quote is from the Dalai Lama, and it is, I think, the most important spiritual quote of the last 20 or 30 years, possibly of the last 100. If scientific analysis were conclusively to demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then we must accept the findings of science and abandon those claims. Is that mind-blowing from a religious figure, from the head of a religious organization? If science proves us wrong, guess what? We've got to change. And yet that's how our history in New Thought is. It's about being open and willing. Carl Jung said, "We want to have certainties and no doubts." Do you ever envy people who are very religious, of a very kind of dogmatic religion? Do you ever envy their ability to just know what's true in any given situation because they've got like 3 choices? It's good, it's bad, I don't know if it's good or bad yet. Carl Jung said, "We want to have certainties and no doubts, results and no experiments, without even seeing that certainties can arise only through doubt and results only through experience." Do you believe in God because you want to, or because you're afraid not to? Do you come here on Sundays because you know that this is going to feed your soul, or because some of you are afraid? And those are tough questions, aren't they? I'm going to talk about my favorite apostle, in fact, my favorite biblical figure, which is Thomas. But I want to talk a little bit about the scientific method. Are people here familiar with the scientific method, this idea? What's amazing about the scientific method is it is not how humans thought for most of the past 2,000 years. That's what's amazing about this. This is a relatively new way of thinking. And the scientific method basically consists of this. You see something, you observe it. You have a thought about it, you have a hypothesis. You say, I think this is why that's happening. You then do something to test that hypothesis. You take action to try and figure it out. And in metaphysics, that action can often be meditation, prayer, journaling, other spiritual practice. And then you draw your conclusion and move on. That's the scientific method. And again, that's the methodology that you hear suggested again and again in New Thought. New Thought authors do not say, believe this because I said it. They say, try it. Experiment. Change your thinking this way. Pray this way. Look at God this way. Understand that the knowledge you have of the divine can be transcendent. In other words, it can be within you already. Now, in Unity, we see the Bible as a metaphor. We see the Bible as a sacred scripture. We treat Bible as a myth, and that is one of the highest compliments that I can give any piece of writing. Because myths are those things that have the deepest meaning to people and often allow us to learn the most. I've always remembered Thomas. When I was a kid, there was an Easter play I was in. And the one thing I remember about it, indeed one of the things I remember most clearly about my Catholic experience, was Thomas in that play. And for those of you that don't know, you've probably heard the phrase, doubting Thomas. Thomas was the doubter. And I remembered it one way, and then ironically I went in and read it, and it was slightly different. But it didn't matter, because the importance, again, of the Bible and Scripture is what it means to us. What do we find? How do we experience it? What does the metaphor speak to? So here's the story on the surface. Jesus comes back from the dead. Awesome. All the apostles are there when he comes back for a visit, except Thomas. Jesus leaves. Thomas comes in the room, and the apostles all say, Jesus came back from the dead. How many of you would be a little skeptical? I mean, really, how many of you? Thomas says, I'm sorry, guys. I've seen a lot of great stuff, but this is more than I can believe. I'm not going to believe it unless I actually see the wounds, unless I actually touch them. Then I'll believe this is what's going on. And of course, as the story goes on, Jesus comes into the room at some point when Thomas is there. And what's beautiful about this story, and what has touched me so deeply in my heart, is that the response of Jesus. Now again, remember, we're not reading this as a literal, this is what happened. This is not a documentary. This is a metaphorical story. Thomas represents that part of us that doubts. He is the personification of doubt in this story. Jesus is the Christ, that part within each of us that is the divine nature, an awareness of our oneness with God. So Thomas is doubting the existence, the power, the presence of the Christ. And how does the Christ respond? Come closer. Touch the wounds. Feel where the spear went in. And it makes me kind of misty because I don't think that there is a more intimate moment in the gospel between Jesus and anybody else. The Christ has invited Thomas, the doubter, the one who, by the way, had the courage to stand in front of his compatriots and say, I don't believe. And he is invited to touch the wounds of the Christ, to feel the wounding, to get more deeply in touch and connected. It's one of the only times I think any of the apostles is talked of as physically touching Jesus. It's so intimate. The Bible isn't telling me, at least in my interpretation, that doubting is bad. Doubting is the path away from that other 11 into a deeper contact. I sometimes think, I wonder if any of the other apostles were kind of like, wow, I wish I'd said I doubted. I would have liked to have had physical contact with my teacher in that way. I would have liked to have touched those places that had hurt him so much, just to deeply understand what it was. To me, that's a very beautiful and touching story about doubt. In that book, The Sin of Certainty, Peter Enns says, preoccupation with correct thinking, that's the deeper problem. It reduces the life of faith to sentry duty, a 24/7 task of pacing the ramparts and scanning the horizon to fend off incorrect thinking in ourselves and others. Too engrossed to come inside the hall and enjoy the banquet, a faith like that is stressful and tedious to maintain. And I think this is especially important in New Thought because we put such a high premium on the importance of positive thinking, on the importance of our thoughts. And that's why what I'm saying here is to consciously doubt. Make room as a spiritual practice to doubt. And by the way, and this happens a lot of times when people are first involved in New Thought and your thoughts create, is anybody here gone through a phase where they were worried that if they had one negative thought, they'd be hit by a truck? That somehow watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon might mean an anvil will fall from the sky at any moment because that's what you're picturing? Anybody? No, Phil, just you. Well, here's the truth as it is taught, and I believe because of my experience, because if it worked the first way, I'd be dead. If simply negative thinking was enough to bring all of that into my life, I wouldn't be here. But here's what I believe. When we think positively, when we think thoughts of love, of caring, of compassion about self and others, we're in alignment with the divine. And those thoughts have the momentum and the power of God. When our thoughts are not in alignment with the divine, they have very little power. Now, yes, over time, constant negative thinking can be tragic. But taking time, again, for skillful doubt, conscious doubt, is something that can allow us the freedom to fully move within our life and within the world. I'm a big believer in an ideal that says, as we do one thing, so we do everything. As we do our spiritual life, so we do our life, because there really isn't separation. And I've been very touched and struck lately by the polarization that I see in our world and our communities here in this country. I had the experience that I found both sad and heartening. Sad in that it happened, heartening that it was a very positive response, when a friend of mine came out as a conservative and was deeply worried that they would be rejected. Things are so polarized that they were worried that they would not be accepted because of their views. And that's why I think this is so important right here and right now. Because it's really kind of ironic. We can be part of a spiritual life, a religion, a philosophy that does not have dogma, and yet absolutely know without a doubt that deep dish pizza is an abomination and does not deserve the term pizza. Anybody here had an argument like that in their life? Sean Connery versus Roger Moore? Those kinds of arguments? But do you feel the surety of your position? One of my teachers early on in one of my classes told a story. This is a man who dedicated himself to open-mindedness, to free thinking. Was also a cook, and someone was talking about how they were preparing ribs. They were going to boil the ribs and then do some things and then put them on the grill. And this teacher turned and said with strong emotion, "That is not how you cook ribs." And he realized what he was doing. He realized how limiting he was to himself. He didn't have any doubt in his mind that that was wrong. Where are we like that? I had that experience today. You maybe notice I'm holding on a microphone. We couldn't find the lavalier I normally use. And the very nice sound man offered me a mic stand. I didn't even think about it. I just said, no, I don't use mic stands. I don't. That's not something I do. Now, it's turned out, I think, to be the best choice. Hopefully you agree that me standing behind a mic stand may not have been optimal. But I never gave it a chance. I never even considered the possibility that it might have been better. How many times in our life are we doing that? About the big things and the small things. Carl Jung said, all fanaticism is repressed doubt. All fanaticism is repressed doubt. Now, we also know that fanatics are who? Those people over there that don't believe the way I do, because obviously I'm not a fanatic. Why? Because I'm right. Isn't that true? How many of us are aware of our own fanaticism? And what does it mean if you're willing to sit with for a moment, if you're willing to imagine that that quote from Jung is true, that your fanaticism, that my fanaticism, that all our fanaticism comes from repressed doubt? How will that change your interaction with others? Carl Jung also said, the more uncertain I have felt about myself, the more there has grown up in me a feeling of kinship with all things. Doubt allows us, when it's controlled, when it's conscious, to more readily see the point of view of others, to try it on, to say maybe they are right. I disagree 100%, but maybe, let me take a moment and step into a place of doubt and think maybe they are right. I can always come back to where I was, but can we open ourselves to that moment? Because here's the thing. Thanksgiving is coming very soon. And we are all going to be having conversations with the crazy uncle, the crazy nephew, the brother, the sister, whoever it is. Are we willing to have that little bit of doubt in ourselves that maybe we're not 100% right? That maybe they're right? How many of you have had a family conflict that lasted at least a year because you knew you were right and they knew they were right? Anybody? Anyone 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Yeah. How many of you got to the point where you couldn't even remember what you were right about and what they were wrong about? You just know you were right and they were wrong. It happens. But what if 15 years before, 5 years before, what if as it was happening, you were able to have an experience of doubt? Maybe I'm not completely correct. Maybe their point of view has merit. One of the things I love about unity, I can be completely invested in this spirituality, completely invested in this faith, and know that people who are Catholic are not necessarily wrong. People who are Baptist are not necessarily wrong. And I love that about unity. Now, that's not necessarily looking in doubt, but it is being willing to look at things from that questioning standpoint. What else is there? What else can there be? I know, looking at the demographics of this audience, that I probably don't even need to read the lyrics to the song Imagine. All of you have it pretty well memorized, but I'm going to anyway. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine. Now, here's one thing I've realized. This song is really easy for us. How many of you, the first time you heard that song, already pretty much believed all of that already? So who is this song for? The people who believed in hell, the people who believed in heaven with Sky Dad and the chair and the hair and all that. It's so easy for us to be willing to let them imagine. Can we imagine? Are you willing to look at the things that you hold as dearly as they hold their belief in hell and imagine something different? Are you willing to take the same step that so many of us pretty much demanded of people in 75 or whenever this came out? And what I love about this song is it's not saying that this is the truth. It's not even telling you to believe that there is no heaven or to believe that there is no hell. My favorite line as I was rereading was, "Imagine no possessions, I wonder if you can." I like my stuff. I really do. I miss it when it's gone. I still grieve a large amount of stuff that left my house. And so my answer, the kind of snide part of me said, "Imagine no possessions, I wonder if you can," was like, "Nope, John, I can't. Nuh-uh. Nope." And then I went deeper and realized that that's the magic. That's the power of this lyric. He's not asking me to give up my stuff. He's not asking me to be in a world with no possessions. But he is saying, imagine. How will it change your life if you're willing to imagine a world that is different than the one you create for yourself? Even those things you think are positive, even those things where you know you're on the right side of history, even those things where you know you have the moral high ground. Because if we're on the moral high ground, that has to mean someone else is on the low ground, and that's usually probably not working out very well for us, is it? Are you willing to take time during the week to imagine? One of the greatest examples of this happened early in my time in New Thought. I was 100% invested in New Thought. I absolutely loved the philosophy. I still do. And I was very obsessed with kind of an ancillary part. Now, this is not part of mainstream New Thought, but it's something that gets added on by a lot of folks, and it's the lesson model of life. Life is about the lessons. We're here on this plane of existence to live, to learn lessons. We got to learn the lessons. I've got to learn the lessons. I'm trying to learn the lessons. This is happening. If I don't learn the lessons, it's going to happen again. I was really invested in the lesson. And the minister one Sunday said, imagine, and he made it very clear he wasn't saying that this was a dogmatic truth, imagine that life is recess. What if this is where we go to relax from all the lessons we're doing on another plane of existence? That's mind-blowing. Wait, this is supposed to be fun? It was like someone hit the tetherball into my nose. Now, the truth is, I don't necessarily hold that to be true. I don't really believe that this is necessarily recess. But can you imagine at the obsessed level I was about learning the lesson, how taking a moment to doubt my truth, to imagine this other truth, shifted me inside? It was very simple. It was a simple statement, but it's been well over 10, 15 years since I heard it. What if this life is recess? What if this is what if we wait in line for like 3 centuries just to get in the gate to come here? What am I doing with the opportunity? By focusing so much on having to learn the lesson and not being enough and needing to do more and more and more and more. Now, I'm not saying you need to change any of your beliefs. I'm not saying that you need to look at the political landscape and suddenly say, oh, you're right. They were the correct side. But can you take a moment and depolarize? Can you take time to let a little bit of doubt in, to not know so surely that the other side is wrong? Because here's the thing about unity. When we're arguing with someone, it's God arguing with God. The divine disagreeing with the divine. Spirit angrily telling another part of spirit that it's an idiot or stupid, or how can you believe that, or how can you vote that way, or how can you support that? Does that change your point of view? If you just imagine that it's God talking to God, divine talking to divine, spirit talking to spirit? Thanksgiving is coming up. And we're going to be sitting with the crazy uncle or the crazy nephew. And we're going to have friends who feel differently than we do about things. I read an article last night, as a matter of fact, on Huffington Post that said 45% of Americans have had a serious argument about this upcoming election. 45%. And those are the people that admitted to it in the poll. And by the way, it didn't say, they didn't have room for one, more than one, or many. So that's at least one. Are we willing to take a step back and allow ourselves that little bit of doubt that we're perfectly right? Because if we're willing to do it about God, if we're willing to say, I'm going to take some time and think about maybe my beliefs in God aren't what they need to be. Maybe it's not what I believe. How many of you think differently about God than you did 5 years ago? How many of you were in New Thought 5 years ago and you still think differently about God now? Because you did what? You had a new thought. You allowed doubt to enter in that the old way was the right way. So if we can do that about God, about spirit, about eternity, can we do it about deep dish pizza? Can we do it about which was the best bond? And I'm using those examples because I really don't want to get us started on anything political. But when I say deep dish and New York style pizza, can you make an analogy for yourselves? Just make it on your own. And then don't blame me. Take time. Make it a part of your spiritual practice, a part of your journaling or a part of your meditation, a part of your prayer. Allow yourself to doubt. Don't be a fanatic. Don't allow repressed doubt to lock you into beliefs that later on may not serve. Be like Thomas. Allow that doubt to bring you closer to the divine. Allow that doubt to allow the divine, to allow the Christ to invite you closer, to invite you deeper, and invite you to touch the pain and the sorrow and the joy that is. Namaste.